Welcome. I am Jay Leeming, and this is the Crane Bag Podcast, and this is the Iliad Part 10. Whoa. Why wait? Why hesitate? Let's get started. Here we go. Well, the next morning, when Helios drove his chariot of golden fire into the sky, the Trojans did not linger beside their campfires, but took hold of sword and spear and approached the wall the Achaeans had built. And as they drew closer, in their thousands, they saw the great trees out of which the wall was made, trees with branches and roots jutting at odd angles, most of these trees by this time having lost their bark and their leaves. And though this wall had been built hastily in the night, of trees simply piled atop one another in a great barricade, the Achaeans had taken the time to build a gate. They had cut several of the trees into boards, and put these boards together to make a gate smooth and well-fitting. And behind this gate there was a great bolt made from an oak tree, keeping the gate shut. So the Trojans approached this gate, and at first they simply took their spears and pounded on that gate with all their strength, but it was too strong. So some went away to get a great tree to use as a ram. But before they returned, Hector came running up with an immense stone he was holding above his head, and with a great cry he hurled it through the air. Wham! It hit that gate dead center, and it cracked and buckled, and the bolt broke. And the gate caved in, and the Trojans streamed in through that gate, and met the Greeks there. And the fighting was fierce between the trees of that wall and the ships themselves, and many warriors soon lay on the ground. But the Trojans had the upper hand. They pressed the Greeks back and back. And there was a boat there. Now this boat was the boat of Protesilaus, the first Greek warrior to set his foot upon the shore, and the first one to die. He'd been dead 9 years now, but his boat remained, and the Trojans approached it, driving the Greeks away from it. And soon only Ajax was left, Ajax with his immense shield, but he too was forced to leap up onto the deck to save himself. But in a flash Hector leapt up onto the deck, and he approached Ajax, and he took his spear and hurled it through the air. Shoom it went, and it hit Ajax's shield dead center, but the force of the blow was so great that it went all the way through the shield, and it was only by twisting to the side at the last moment that Ajax avoided death. And now Hector brandished his sword and approached Ajax, and Ajax, for his part, was reluctant to cast his spear away, so hemmed in was he by Trojan warriors. So instead he thrashed and wheeled around with this spear, keeping them from him. But Hector was unafraid, and he darted forward, and in a single blow he cut the end of that spear from the shaft, and the head of that spear clattered to the deck. And he leapt forward again with his bright sword, and Ajax, fearing for his life, leapt from the boat and ran away. And now Hector called for fire, and a torch thrown by a Trojan came wheeling through the air and landed on the deck. And Hector picked it up and thrust it down below deck amid the timbers there. And then a second torch came, and a third. These two he set down in the midst of that boat, and soon he had to leap from that boat because the flames were sweeping across the deck and then crackling up the mast. So a great cheer went up from the Trojans, but the Greeks were filled only with fear. And they pressed forward, hoping to break through the Trojan ranks, but they found this impossible. But though many Greek soldiers ran towards this boat to try to save it, there was one man who ran in the opposite direction. And this was Patroclus. He ran through the Greek camp, past all the ships of the Achaeans, until at last he came to the edge of the camp and to the tent of Achilles. The Myrmidons were there, loading jars of honey and sweet wine into their boats, preparing for the journey home across the sea. And breathless Patroclus ran into the tent of Achilles. Achilles had just wrapped his lyre in purple cloth and picked it up. He was preparing to stow it in his boat for the journey home. And Patroclus said, "Achilles, do you see what is happening? Do you see?" Achilles looked out the door of the tent. Far in the distance he could see smoke rising. "I see," said Achilles. "You see," said Patroclus, "but do you feel? Do you feel how all our companions will be marooned here, their boats burned, all of them ground down, killed on this shore by Hector and all his warriors?" "They have made their choice, Patroclus," said Achilles, "as I have made mine." "My love," said Patroclus, "you do not need to be so cold. I know there is compassion in your heart. We can do something. We can help them." "I will not," said Achilles. "Well, if you will not," said Patroclus, "I will. What of your armor? Achilles, what if I were to wear your armor? If I did that, if everyone saw the gleaming armor made by Hephaestus for your father, if they saw that armor, they would take me for you. The Trojans would be filled with fear, and then we would have a chance. We could drive them back, away from the boats, away from the wall." "Patroclus," said Achilles, "what trouble is this you were brewing for the two of us?" "This is not trouble," said Patroclus. "This is a good thing. I will help them. They can be saved." "If you do this," said Achilles, "then yes, drive them away from the boats, drive them away from the wall, but do not go farther. Do not drive the Trojans across the river Scamander. Do not in any way attempt to take the city of Troy, for that, I think, is a thing that the gods will not allow." "Do not fear," said Patroclus. "I will drive them away from our boats, drive them away from the wall, but I will go no farther." "Then wear my armor, and do what good you can," said Achilles. "But return to me here, so that you and I may set sail for home." "I will," said Patroclus. And so he put the armor on, the gleaming armor fashioned out of red gold by the god Hephaestus himself, and given to Achilles' father, King Peleus, in a meadow at the top of Mount Pelion, long ago, at a wedding where the gods and the humans had laughed and danced together in a harmony that it seemed would never end. He put this armor on, and when he did so, his body shone like the sun. And then he kissed Achilles goodbye, and as Achilles watched him go, Patroclus turned and walked out of the tent and into the light. He looked far off, and he could see the smoke rising, more of it now, black smoke rising into the sky. And Patroclus took his spear from where it stood leaning against the stern of their boat, and he picked that spear up, and he began to walk. He walked through the Greek camp, the light of Helios shining on the armor he wore. And seeing the smoke, he began to walk faster and faster. And finally, he broke into a run. Closer and closer he came. He could hear their voices now, shouting, the Greeks and the Trojans. He could see the swords and the spears shining in the air. He could see the flames climbing up the mast of that boat, devouring it. He ran, and he ran harder still, and when he came close to that boat, he leapt onto the deck of a nearby ship. And he stood before them all, and shining in the sun, he gave a great cry. And they saw him there, standing on the deck of that boat, like a god, the armor shining, resplendent, giving its light out to the world in every direction. And in that moment, hope entered the hearts of every Greek warrior, and fear entered the hearts of the Trojans. They remembered Achilles, how he had killed Cygnus, the unkillable man, on the beach when the Greeks first arrived at Troy. So that now, as one, they gasped, they shrank back, and Patroclus, brandishing his spear, leapt from that boat and after the Trojans. And quickly the Trojans were driven away from the ships and through the shattered gates of the wall. But Patroclus did not stop there. He hurled his spear. He took down a Trojan warrior. He pulled the spear from the man's body, and he kept running. And soon the Trojans were well away from the wall. But still, Patroclus did not stop. He kept running with all the Greek army behind him, shouting. Shouting they went, and soon they came to the river Scamander, and they drove the Trojan warriors into that river. Pell-mell they went, thrashing, running, wading through those waters. And many were cut down, so that the river ran red with their blood. And Patroclus clambered out onto the other side, and the Greeks were behind him. And they went further, running towards the city of Troy. There it was, so close. It could be taken today, thought Patroclus. Perhaps I am the one to end this war on this day. And he looked as the warriors fought around him, spears and swords gleaming in the bright air. He looked, and he saw that part of the wall had a slope to it. There was an incline. A man could perhaps climb it. And he walked towards this part of the wall, and he saw cracks and gouges in the stones. And in fact, these were the claw marks of the sea dragon who had attacked Troy so many years before. So, fitting his feet into these gouges in the stone, Patroclus began to climb. Higher and higher he went, the bright blue air above him. Behind him, the shouts of men fighting, wrestling, fighting there on the plain. Higher and higher he went, and then suddenly, wham! A great blow struck him down to the ground. What was that? He looked. No one was there. No one was on the wall. What had happened? But with renewed strength, he stood up, and he walked to the wall, and he fit his feet more easily now. Finding those gouges, he went higher up on the stones, climbing the wall of Troy. As Helios, the sun god, shone down, as far down the warriors struggled, and then another blow, wham! And he landed down on the ground. What magic is this, he thought. I can end this. He stood up. Again, he came to the wall. He remembered green dice in his hands as a boy. This was just another game. He would win this game. He would end the war. Higher and higher he went, and then a third blow, wham! And he was down on the ground again, looking up, dizzy at the sky. What strange magic is this, thought Patroclus. But still, he stood up again. He approached the wall. Finding those gouges in the stones, he began to climb. He remembered green dice rattling in his hands as a boy. This was just another game. He would win this game. He would end the war on this day. The sky bright above him. Higher he went. Arrows showered down upon him, but he beat them away with his shield. And then a third blow came. Wham! And he was down on the grass. And he looked up. And in the air above him, he saw a man. A man beautiful, resplendent, like the sun. And he knew this man to be in fact the god Apollo. And Apollo looked at him and said, "You shall not." And his voice rang in his ears as Apollo faded away. And Patroclus staggered up. He looked around. The city of Troy was behind him, immense, unconquerable. Far away, he saw smoke rising into the air from Protesilaus' boat. How had he come so far from home? What would he do? Why was he here? And then Apollo came behind him and struck him a fourth and final blow between the shoulder blades. And Patroclus' spear shattered into a cloud of dust, and his armor fell from his body, and his helmet toppled from his head and fell to the ground. His ears ringing, he swayed, shaken by the god, beaten by the god, and his long dark hair tumbled down, and everyone saw it. This was not the bright, gleaming, shining hair of Achilles, but the hair of someone else. And all the Trojans knew in that moment that this was not Achilles. And seeing this, they came closer, curious and then joyful. "It's not Achilles," someone said. And a Trojan named Euphorbus ran out of the throng of warriors and slashed Patroclus across the back, but then ran back into the crowd, fearful still of his power. And then out of the crowd came a single man, strong, beautiful, holding a spear, and it was Hector. And he walked straight towards Patroclus. And trembling, Patroclus raised his spear and cast it into the air, but it was a weak blow. It glanced off the side of Hector's shield and fell to the ground. And still Hector came on, and with something almost like sorrow in his eyes, he cast his spear, and it struck Patroclus square in the chest, so that he staggered back, and gagging on blood, he fell down to the ground. And Hector ran to him, and stood over him, and said, "Go to the world of death, poor man, and leave me and my city in peace." And Patroclus, with his last breath, looked up at Hector and said, "Hector, be not proud, for your death shall follow mine close behind. For my love Achilles will come, he will hunt you down, and he cannot be beaten." "Let him come," said Hector, "for I am of Troy, and here I make my stand. And who is to say but that I might not kill Achilles, and send him down to join you soon in the kingdom of shadows and death?" And with that Hector planted his foot upon Patroclus's chest, and wrenched the spear from his body. And Patroclus died, his spirit plunging down into the depths, falling as though the earth were suddenly water, and his spirit a stone, plunging, falling, dropping down through the numberless depths, grieving and crying as it went, until finally it came to the kingdom of death. And like a ripple moving through water, the news of Patroclus's death moved through the battlefield and into the Greek camp, so that soon Odysseus heard of it, and Agamemnon, and Ajax, and Diomedes. But when the old man Nestor heard this news, he turned to his son Antilochus and said, "Antilochus, run across the battlefield, run through the Greek camp, go to Achilles, and tell him what has happened. Though it will plunge him into black despair, tell him this news, for he must be told." So Antilochus, heeding his father's words, ran across the battlefield and into the Greek camp. He ran past all of the tents, past all of the boats, until he came to the tent of Achilles. But Achilles was not in his tent. Fearful in his heart, he had gone up onto the deck of his ship to watch the battle. So for a long while he had looked far off. He had seen how Patroclus and the Achaeans had driven the Trojans away from the boats, away from the wall they had built. He had seen how they had pursued them across the plain, even into the river Scamander, and how they had not stopped there, but gone on, even to the gates of Troy itself. But there he could not see anything. All was dust and glinting light on armor. Fearfully he had watched, and now he saw Antilochus coming, running to him. So he leapt down from his boat to stand before him. Antilochus arrived, panting and gasping. The two of them looked at each other. Each of them a thread now in a larger tapestry. Each of them a note in a larger music. Both of them part of a pattern, an eternal pattern, to be repeated over and over. Achilles knew in his heart what Antilochus would say. And Antilochus could do nothing but say the words. "Achilles, Patroclus has fallen. He has been slain by Hector before the gates of Troy, and his soul has gone down to the world of Hades." Hearing these words, Achilles fell to his knees. He gave a great red cry which split the air, and then he beat the ground with his fists, shouting, and he clutched handfuls of the dirt in his hands and smeared that dirt over his face as his tears fell down into the generous earth. And then, in the midst of the storm of his grief, he looked up at Antilochus, at the sky, at all the wild gods in all the corners of the world, and he said, "I will kill them. I will kill them all." Greetings. Thank you for joining me for this story. Thank you for joining me here in this little space we have made after the story, like a little house, perhaps, in a forest, where we gather to hold this story in our hearts and in our minds and in our imaginations, in our dreaming bones and brains. Because the story has happened, it's occurred, we've listened to it, and so it's still humming in the air a little bit. And we can scare it away with, analysis. We can scare it away by running off to do something else, which sometimes we have to do in this world. But if you are able, I invite you to sit with this story for a moment, to sit with its images, to let them hum and buzz around you, and to feel what they have, perhaps, to say. And I would invite you to consider the energy of this story, the way it moves between the Trojans and the Greeks. We've had this motion from the Trojans to the Greeks, this attack, Hector, all the legions come, the warriors come, and then we get this motion backwards. It's really quite beautiful. The Trojans push the Greeks further than they've been pushed before. They break down the wall, they get in there with the ships, they start burning the ships. And then we get this one continuous line of energy, of movement, which begins with the tent of Achilles and with Patroclus in that tent. And the two of them, Achilles, who has his lyre, like he's wrapped it up, he's going to pack it in the boat and he's going to leave. And from that moment, we get this line of movement. If it's, maybe this is simplistic, but you might think of it as the right and the left. If the Trojans are on the right here, we got a movement all go far to the left. And there we are in the tent with Achilles. And we get this sort of rising crescendo, perhaps, of action, of energy, of motion, which begins. I mean, feel them there in that tent, kissing goodbye. And Patroclus in the armor, shining like the sun. This armor which has come a long way, which has come from the heights of Olympus, where Hephaestus made it, crafted it in his workshop, and was then given at the wedding of Peleus and Thetis to Peleus himself, a moment of harmony. And here it is, Patroclus is going to put it on. And we get this motion from the farewell scene between Achilles and Patroclus to the boats, and Patroclus leaping onto a boat, and the journey, fighting, pushing the Trojans out away from the wall, across the plain, over the river Scamander, and to Troy. So this poem, this story, swings back and forth. These two dancers, the Trojans and the Greeks, speaking to each other through death, through a blaze of beauty and glory, and through knives, swords, spears, suffering, grief, death. And more specifically, we have the journey of Patroclus, who goes beyond what is fated, who is told by Achilles to drive the Trojans away from the boats and away from the wall, but to go no farther. And he does, of course, go too far. He goes over the river, he tries to take Troy itself, and he fails and he dies. Although he fails, I mean, more specifically, right, Apollo stops him. He isn't stopped by Trojans exactly, but he is killed completely with Apollo, like being the ringleader, the one who makes it happen. He hits him 3 times, keeps him away from the wall, and then he gives him this tremendous blow on the back. Wham! All his armor falls off, his spear shatters, his helmet falls off. So does he fail? Well, he is made to fail by the gods. And again, we have this question of free will. Did he have a choice? He chose to go beyond, and the gods punished him for it, basically. So again, we have this conception of fate. Our lives are set. Those 3 fates, they measure out our lives. And not only that, but the shape of our lives is determined by the fates or by the gods. That would seem to be, it's one conception that comes out of the world of this story, one idea about it. And Achilles knows this, which is interesting. He knows that Patroclus shouldn't go too far. He also knows that Patroclus has the capacity to go too far, which that is probably simply psychological. If you remember, Patroclus killed a playmate of his when he was a child, accidentally. He was playing dice with another child, and he pushed another boy who hit his head on a rock and died. So throughout this story, Patroclus is depicted as someone who has restraint, who knows the risks and the dangers and the death which can result from going too far. Because as a small boy, a young boy, he went too far. And he let out his rage, his anger, and killed another childhood playmate. By accident, of course. And so he provides a contrast to Achilles, who gives in to his rage, and with that rage, he's angry at Agamemnon, and so he chooses not to fight. And death is the result for his colleagues, for his fellow warriors. But here we have Patroclus losing it and just going too far. As we know he is capable of doing, in his life he's done that, but for a long time it seemed he has remembered those lessons that he learned, that lesson he learned as a child, and has not gone too far. He's able to show restraint, whereas Achilles is not able to do that. So it's a remarkable moment. And I guess the question is, are all the characters in this epic governed by a fate which they cannot escape? Or do some of them make choices which alter their lives, either for better or for worse? Certainly Achilles is given a choice. His mother, the sea goddess Thetis, tells him he can choose either a short life that's glorious and filled with fame, or a long life which is comfortable and quiet. So he at least has a choice. Does Helen have a choice? Does Paris have a choice? Paris is famously given a choice which is no choice at all. Helen seems simply herself. Is she too an instrument of the gods? Is every human here simply living out a purpose given to them by the gods? Or do they get to choose? Do they get to decide which path to go down? Of course, in America, we love to believe that we can choose our fates. It's up to us. This is the source of much joy and a sense of freedom. It is also the source of much suffering. Because if it's all up to you and you fail, then it's your fault. And it's not the system. It's not racism. It's not sexism. It's not any other ism. It's not some, thing the gods decided. It was all up to you, man. It's all up to you. So if you're a millionaire, it's all because of how great you are. And if you are living in poverty, it's all because of how, lazy you are, and uncool, and unintelligent. That's the message America gives us, which is both a shackle around our ankles and, to some measure, a liberating message. And if America could go on without that message, if you could take that idea out of America, I wonder what would be left. And I am thinking of Rumi and of the Buddha. Rumi, the Muslim poet and Sufi mystic, who began his life as a Muslim theologian, basically a combination between a minister and a lawyer, as we think of it now. Like his father had been. He was following in his father's footsteps. And then he met the spiritual wild man, Shams, and Rumi began to dance at all hours of the day and night and to write poetry. And he was just ecstatic with the divine for the rest of his life. Was that fated? Was that part of the plan? Was that part of the arc of his life? And Buddha, similar story. He began life as a prince living in luxury and broke out of that and sat beneath a tree and became the enlightened one and became awake. Did these individuals decide to do these things? Did they make a choice? Or were they chosen by the divine? Were they simply more open to the forces beyond, which in this story are the gods and goddesses? But in other stories, in other ideas about the world, are spirits, are, the powers beyond us, the mystery. That's an open question, but I am inspired by Rumi dancing and singing. I am inspired by Buddha sitting under that tree and suddenly glowing with light. Thank you for listening to this story. Thank you for attending to it. I invite you to make a gift to this story. It will deepen your relationship with it. It will also nourish the story and yourself so that it may go on and flourish in a time beyond our own. And by our attention, we nourish this story, but also with gifts. Give it some breath. Give it a song. Give it a poem that you write and then give away to the wild in some way. That is a way to be in dialogue with this story, to relate to it as a living being, to relate to it as an ecology of which you are a part. We enter the forest and suddenly we are a part of that forest, and our breath is taken in by the trees, and the breath of the trees is taken up by us. This story isn't something far away. It's right here. It's in us. It may be in you. There are more stories on my website, which is jayleeming.com, JAYLEEMING.com. If you are able to support my work as a storyteller and that podcast, please do so. You can do that via patreon.com/storyjl. That's patreon.com/storyjl. I often tell stories online, such as the Iliad, such as other large, big, beautiful stories, and those tellings are free to folks that are a part of my Patreon community. Epics and big stories work well in that format online because you can tell a little piece of it every week. I told the Mahabharata. I've done that a couple times online. It takes like 14 weeks, but it's a great way to get through the summer, the spring, the autumn, or the winter. It's a great way to move forward through this world. May this story live in your heart. Thank you for listening, and take care.